In the high-stakes world of emergency response, seconds don't merely pass by. They disappear, swallowed whole by the relentless maw of unfolding crisis. Each tick of the clock isn't a measurement of time, but a countdown to a potential catastrophe. A silent ultimatum demanding immediate decisions long before all the pieces of a fractured puzzle have even begun to surface. This isn't a realm for hesitation or the luxury of complete information. It is a crucible where foresight must often substitute for full understanding, where the weight of a life can rest on a gut feeling, and where a single swift choice can divert an impending disaster or inadvertently usher it in. The air in these centers is thick with unspoken tension, a constant hum of anticipation for the moment when the ordinary shatters and the extraordinary demands an instant, unwavering response. The sterile, fluorescent glow of the 911 dispatch center in a bustling American metropolis typically offered a deceptive calm. It was a place designed for order, for the methodical processing of distress into actionable intelligence. But on one particular Tuesday afternoon, that veneer of routine was about to crack. The digital clock on the wall, a silent sentinel, read 2:17 p.m. as a new call blinked into existence on dispatcher Sarah Jenkins' screen. Her fingers, accustomed to the rhythmic dance across the keyboard, paused for a fraction of a second. The incoming line registered as an unknown mobile number, a common enough occurrence, but something about the immediate, jarring static that followed felt different. It was an almost imperceptible ripple in the otherwise predictable stream of daily emergencies. Sarah, her headset nestled comfortably over her ears, pressed the answer button. 911, what's your emergency? She articulated. Her voice a practiced blend of calm authority and empathetic concern. What followed was not the usual coherent, if distressed, recitation of facts. Instead, a cacophony of sound assaulted her ears. A low, guttural murmur, interspersed with what sounded like muffled shouts and the distant, unsettling clang of metal. Then, a voice, thin and reedy, broke through the noise, laced with an almost paralyzing terror. He's got the thing. It's... The words dissolved into a choked sob, swallowed by the rising tide of ambient noise. Sarah's brow furrowed. Sir, can you hear me? What does he have? Where are you? Her questions were precise, designed to cut through panic, to anchor the caller to reality. But the voice on the other end seemed to float untethered. The building. It's shaking. Oh God. Help us. He's going to... The connection crackled violently, then went dead. A cold knot tightened in Sarah's stomach. The silence that followed was far more unnerving than the chaos that preceded it. She immediately attempted to redial the number, but it went straight to voicemail. The system's automatic location tracker, usually pinpoint accurate, offered only a broad radius spanning several city blocks, a notorious dead zone for GPS signals due to the concentration of high rises. No specific address, no clear description of the thing. Just a terrified voice, a shaking building, and a chilling, incomplete threat. Her colleague, Mark, across the console, glanced over, sensing the shift in her demeanor. Everything okay, Sarah? He mumbled, his own call ending. I don't know, Mark, she replied, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze fixed on the blank screen where the call details should have been. I just had a call. Something felt profoundly wrong. Not just a usual panic attack. This was... different. The fear was palpable. She replayed the fragmented words in her mind. Shaking. The thing. He's going to. The pieces didn't fit, yet they coalesced into a deeply unsettling premonition. It was a gut feeling, an instinct honed by years of deciphering distress, that this wasn't merely a confused individual hallucinating. This was the faint, terrifying echo of a nascent crisis, a whisper of impending danger that defied the fragmented words and screamed for immediate attention. The city, oblivious to the silent alarm that had just been tripped, continued its afternoon rhythm, unaware that its fragile peace was hanging by a thread that Sarah Jenkins now felt herself clutching. The digital clock on Sarah's console, a stark red against the muted grey, seemed to mock her with its relentless march. Each second that ticked by felt like a physical weight pressing down, amplifying the urgency of the situation. Protocols, usually a comforting framework for chaos, now felt like shackles. The standard operating procedure dictated an attempt to re-establish contact, to triangulate the signal more precisely, to gather more data before dispatching any units. But Sarah's gut screamed a different command. Act now. We don't have time to wait, she muttered under her breath, her fingers hovering over the dispatch controls. Her mind raced, sifting through the fragmented data. A shaking building, an unspecified thing, an unknown perpetrator, a call abruptly cut off. It was a terrifyingly incomplete puzzle, yet the stakes felt impossibly high. The choice was stark. Adhere to procedure and risk losing precious minutes, or bypass the rules, gamble on an incomplete threat assessment, and potentially send responders into an unknown, dangerous situation. Mark, having finished his own call, noticed the intensity in Sarah's posture. "What's up, Sarah? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," she replied, her voice tight. "A ghost that could bring down a building?" She quickly relayed the details, the chillingly vague phrases, the dead zone for GPS. Mark's easygoing demeanor evaporated. He understood the immense pressure of limited information, the agony of having to make the call now with lives hanging in the balance. The emergency services operated on a delicate balance between swift action and informed decision-making. Today, that balance was shattered. Dispatching units without a clear address or threat profile was almost unheard of, a direct violation of safety protocols designed to protect both the public and the responders themselves. Yet, the alternative, waiting for more information that might never come, felt like a dereliction of duty, a silent complicity in whatever horror was unfolding. The psychological tension in the room was palpable, a heavy silence punctuated only by the low hum of the computers and the distant chatter of other dispatchers handling routine calls. Sarah closed her eyes for a fleeting second, picturing the terrified caller, the implied shaking of a building. Her past experiences, the ones that had hardened her resolve, also whispered warnings of false alarms, of overreactions. But this felt different. The raw, unadulterated terror in that voice wasn't performance. It was primal. Then, a flicker on her secondary monitor caught her eye. It was a digital map, displaying real-time seismic activity, usually a background hum of data, rarely relevant to 911 calls. A small, almost imperceptible blip had appeared, centered precisely within the broad geographical radius the automated system had provided for the disconnected call. It wasn't a major tremor, not enough to register on public news channels, but it was something. A localized, anomalous vibration, precisely timed with the call. The blood drained from Sarah's face. "Mark," she whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "Look at this. A micro-seismic event, right in the zone." Mark leaned closer, his eyes widening. A critical piece of information, initially overlooked, now surfaced, hinting at a larger danger. The shaking building wasn't just a metaphor for fear. It was a literal, physical event. And if the building was indeed shaking, if there was a thing, and someone was going to do something, the implications were catastrophic. The vague threat now had a terrifying, concrete anchor. The city's fragile peace was not just hanging by a thread, it was actively being frayed. and Sarah was the only one who had heard the first snap. The revelation of the micro-seismic event acted like a jolt of electricity, snapping Sarah from her internal debate. The vague threat had solidified, gaining a terrifying, almost mechanical precision. The shaking wasn't just a terrified caller's perception. It was a measurable physical phenomenon, localized and timed perfectly with the desperate, truncated plea. This wasn't a false alarm, nor was it a simple structural defect. This was something active, something malevolent. The implications cascaded through her mind, each thought a hammer blow against her calm. A micro-seismic event could be caused by many things. A small underground explosion, a sudden collapse, even heavy machinery failing. But combined with the caller's frantic words, "They're going to," it painted a grim picture of deliberate, imminent destruction. Her gaze met Mark's, a silent understanding passing between them. The protocols, the endless checklists, the bureaucratic layers designed to prevent rash decisions, all of it seemed utterly irrelevant now. They were standing at the precipice of a catastrophe, armed with little more than a terrified whisper and a digital blip. The weight of the choice pressed down on Sarah, a physical burden that seemed to constrict her breathing. Every fiber of her being screamed for more information, for confirmation, for a clear path. But time, that relentless, unforgiving entity, was not on their side. Every second spent seeking validation was a second lost, a second closer to whatever horror was about to unfold. She pictured the caller again, the raw terror in that voice. It wasn't just fear, it was the sound of someone witnessing the unthinkable, someone on the cusp of an irreversible event. Sarah's mind raced, sifting through training, past incidents, the agonizing memories of decisions made too late or based on faulty intelligence. There was the warehouse fire last year, where firefighters were held back awaiting confirmation of hazardous materials, only for the building to collapse, trapping several inside. And the school lockdown, a false alarm that led to a chaotic evacuation, injuring more students than the perceived threat ever could have. The ghosts of those moments, the chilling what-ifs, now swirled around her, amplifying the pressure. This wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about choosing the least catastrophic path in a landscape of unknowns. Sarah knew that to hesitate, to demand further verification, would be to condemn the caller, and potentially countless others, to whatever fate awaited them. Her fingers hovered over the console, the final order forming in her mind. It was a gamble, a leap of faith into a terrifying void, but it was the only option left that offered a glimmer of hope. The silence in the dispatch center seemed to deepen, a heavy, expectant hush that absorbed every sound. Even the distant chatter of other dispatches faded into an indistinct hum. Then, with a resolve that hardened her jaw, Sarah spoke, her voice clear and cutting through the tension. "Alert all available units. Code red. Possible active structural threat. Unknown origin. Prioritize immediate response to the broad area from the disconnected 911 call. Initiate immediate building evacuation protocols for all structures within a quarter-mile radius of the suspected micro-seismic event epicenter." Her words, usually a measured cadence, came out as a rapid-fire command, each syllable imbued with desperate urgency. "We're going in blind, but we're going in now." Mark stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and reluctant admiration. Evacuation protocols for an unknown threat based on a single, disconnected call and a tiny seismic blip? It was unprecedented, a move that would undoubtedly draw fire from every direction if it proved to be a false alarm. But he saw the conviction in her eyes, the terrifying certainty that had replaced her earlier hesitation. The final order had been given, its nature a bold, almost reckless gamble, and its immediate target, a sprawling urban area now facing the daunting prospect of mass evacuation without a clear explanation. The city was about to be turned upside down, and for what, they could only pray. The immediate consequences of Sarah's audacious command rippled outward with astonishing speed. Sirens, initially distant and sporadic, began to swell into a cacophony of urgent wails, converging from every direction. Police cruisers, fire engines and ambulances, their lights flashing like a frantic heartbeat against the urban landscape, redirected their paths, abandoning routine calls for the undefined, escalating emergency. Secondary calls, initially dismissed as unrelated background noise, now flooded the dispatch center's lines, each one a fragment contributing to a rapidly forming mosaic of chaos. Reports of unusual tremors, distant rumbling, and strange, almost imperceptible vibrations from residents within the designated quarter-mile radius began to pour in, lending an unsettling validation to Sarah's initial, instinctual fear. The city, a sprawling beast of concrete and steel, began to stir with an unfamiliar, anxious energy. Traffic, usually a predictable ebb and flow, snarled into impenetrable knots as bewildered drivers tried to comprehend the sudden, widespread emergency directives blaring from their radios. Pedestrians, initially confused by the sudden blare of loudspeakers announcing mandatory evacuations, transitioned into a panicked scramble, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Office buildings, retail spaces, and residential complexes, caught unaware, became hives of frantic activity as people rushed to comply, their questions unanswered, their anxieties mounting. The sheer scale of the disruption was immense, a testament to the domino effect of a single, high-stakes decision made in the crucible of limited information. The ripple effect of Sarah's order touched every arm of the city's emergency services. The police department, grappling with the unprecedented demand for immediate area lockdown and crowd control, diverted patrol cars from distant sectors, stretching their resources thin. The fire department, bracing for an unknown structural collapse, mobilized specialized rescue teams, their heavy equipment rumbling through the streets. Paramedics, already overwhelmed by the usual daily emergencies, prepared for mass casualties, their medical kits overflowing with supplies, their faces grim. Even the city's public works department was pressed into service, hastily rerouting traffic, setting up temporary shelters, and preparing for potential infrastructure damage. The Unified Command Center, usually a bastion of calm coordination, transformed into a maelstrom of shouted orders and frantic updates, all attempting to manage the rapidly unfolding scenario. As the city teetered on the brink of widespread panic, a sudden, chilling development unfolded, shattering the fragile illusion of control. Across the dispatch screens, a new anomaly flickered into existence, a data point that directly contradicted every initial assumption. The micro-seismic readings, which had been the tenuous foundation for Sarah's decision, suddenly spiked dramatically, not just in the initial suspected epicenter, but in a series of disparate, seemingly unconnected locations across the city. It wasn't a single event, but multiple, simultaneous, localized disturbances. The initial theory of a single structural threat, perhaps a compromised building or an underground utility failure, evaporated instantly, replaced by a far more sinister and baffling reality. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. Its pattern was too erratic, too widespread, too precise in its scattered locations. A cold dread seeped into the dispatch room, a collective realization that they weren't dealing with an accidental disaster. This was something orchestrated, something deliberately designed to sow chaos and destruction. The stakes, already impossibly high, had just been catapulted into an entirely new dimension. The initial assumption of a localized threat had been terrifying enough. The revelation of a coordinated, widespread attack sent a shiver down the spines of even the most seasoned emergency responders. The city was not just reacting to an incident. It was under siege, and the true nature of the threat remained horrifyingly opaque. shrouded in the escalating tremors that now convulsed the sprawling metropolis. The revelation of multiple simultaneous disturbances across the city plunged the dispatch center into an abyss of multiplied pressure far beyond anything they had anticipated. Sarah, her face now pale and drawn, felt the weight of her swift, decisive action intensify 100-fold. Her initial order, once a bold stroke of necessary leadership, now felt like a gamble with the lives of millions, an unforeseen consequence of a situation that had morphed into something far more insidious. Every decision made since the first tremor now required immediate justification. Every resource deployed needed to be sustained, and the very foundation of their response strategy faced relentless scrutiny. The emotional and mental toll on the entire team became palpable, a silent, suffocating presence in the room. Supervisors, their initial support now tinged with a desperate need for answers, hovered around Sarah's console. Their questions, though voiced calmly, carried an undercurrent of urgency, demanding clarity that Sarah herself did not possess. "What was the basis for the widespread evacuation, Sarah?" one asked, his voice low but firm, referencing the now burdensome task of managing an entire city's population in motion. "How do we justify the massive resource allocation without a confirmed point of impact?" Another pressed, his eyes darting between her and the flickering screens that painted a grim picture of urban disarray. Each query, each glance chipped away at her resolve, stirring a cauldron of self-doubt within her. Had she overreacted? Had her gut instinct, usually her most trusted guide, led them astray? The burden of potential failure weighed heavily, a crushing force that threatened to buckle her under its immense strain. The city's fate, it seemed, rested not just on her shoulders, but on the validity of her every split-second judgment. Across the room, the other dispatchers mirrored Sarah's internal torment, their faces a canvas of fear and uncertainty. They had followed her lead, executed her commands with unwavering professionalism, but now, faced with the bewildering reality of a multi-pronged threat, a quiet anxiety began to spread. Murmurs of trepidation rippled through the consoles, hushed questions about the nature of the threat, whispers of what might have been missed. Each dispatcher wrestled with their own conscience, replaying their own contributions to the unfolding chaos, searching for any overlooked detail, any misinterpretation that could have averted this escalating nightmare. They had trained for single-point disasters, for clear, definable threats. This shapeless, widespread terror was a new, terrifying frontier, and the fear of personal culpability, however irrational, gnawed at their minds. Just as the internal conflict threatened to paralyze the command center, a new, jarring voice erupted through the main audio feed, cutting through the tense atmosphere with a chilling authority. It wasn't a panicked civilian, nor a frantic first responder. It was a calm, almost unnervingly composed voice, laced with an unmistakable undercurrent of menace. "This is Commander Thorne from Homeland Security. Put me through to the incident commander immediately." The voice paused, a beat of deafening silence, before continuing. "And I want to know, precisely, why a major metropolitan area is being thrown into chaos based on unverified seismic anomalies. Your department is now fully accountable for this situation." The tone was not a request, it was a demand, an immediate challenge to Sarah's authority, and a direct threat to the fragile operational autonomy of the dispatch center. A cold, hard knot formed in Sarah's stomach. The stakes had just been raised again, not just by an unseen enemy, but by a higher power demanding answers she didn't fully possess, and demanding them now. The city was not just reeling from an attack. It was now under federal scrutiny, and the clock for justification had begun ticking even faster. The air in the command center crackled with an almost palpable tension as Commander Thorne's voice faded, leaving an echoing silence that felt heavier than any noise. Sarah, though inwardly shaken, straightened her shoulders, her jaw set with a renewed determination. The external challenge, paradoxically, solidified her resolve. She knew, deep in her gut, that her decision had been right, even if the evidence remained stubbornly elusive. It was a gamble, yes, but one she felt compelled to take. And now, the moment of truth was upon them. Suddenly, a junior dispatcher, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, pointed frantically at one of the main screens. A new data stream had just burst forth, a frantic, almost chaotic cascade of numbers and graphs. It was raw, seismic data, but this time it was different. Instead of the broad, diffuse anomalies that had initially triggered Sarah's alarm, these were sharp, localized spikes, originating from multiple distinct points across the city. The pattern was horrifyingly clear, not a natural event, but a coordinated series of subterranean detonations. The initial, vague readings had been merely the precursors, the whispers before the roar. Almost simultaneously, the 911 lines, which had been a cacophony of panicked individual calls, now began to light up in specific, concentrated clusters. Calls were pouring in from the exact locations correlating with the new seismic spikes. Explosions, structural collapses, panic. The words tumbled out of the callers' mouths, disjointed and terrified, painting a vivid picture of urban chaos. The city was under attack, not from above, but from beneath. A silent, insidious enemy that had struck with precision. A collective gasp swept through the command center. The initial, unverified threat had not been an overreaction. It had been an underestimation. Sarah's intuition, her leap of faith, had been tragically validated. The partial evacuation, the redirection of emergency services, these now appeared not as hasty oversteps, but as desperate, prescient moves that had undoubtedly saved countless lives. Without that preemptive action, the ensuing attacks would have caught a fully populated city completely off guard, turning a crisis into an unimaginable catastrophe. But the relief was fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the grim reality of the unfolding disaster. Ambulances, already en route to pre-staged positions, were now being diverted to actual impact zones, their sirens wailing a mournful symphony through the smoke-filled streets. Fire crews, previously waiting for confirmation, were immediately battling blazes that erupted from fractured gas lines and shattered infrastructure. The police, already spread thin, managing the partial evacuation, were now confronting the immediate aftermath of multiple explosions, trying to maintain order amidst the rising tide of fear. The cost was immense. Even with the early warning, the damage was staggering. Buildings teetered precariously, their foundations compromised. Streets were choked with debris, impassable to emergency vehicles. And amidst the chaos, the human toll began to mount. Casualties, though significantly fewer than what might have been, were still a stark reminder of the violence unleashed upon the city. The faces of the dispatchers, previously etched with doubt, now reflected a profound weariness, a shared burden of witnessing such destruction, even as they worked tirelessly to mitigate it. Sarah felt a cold dread settle over her, a heavy weight that had nothing to do with self-doubt and everything to do with the sheer scale of the horror before her. She had been right, yes, but at what price? The city was wounded, its skyline scarred, its people traumatized. Yet, amidst the devastation, a quiet, undeniable truth emerged. The decision, the one made in the fog of uncertainty, had averted something far, far worse. The early evacuation, the prepositioning of resources, these actions, born of a desperate gamble, had created a critical buffer, a precious window that allowed first responders to react, to rescue, to save. The true scale of the disaster that was averted, the thousands of lives that would have been lost had the city been at full capacity, was a silent, chilling testament to the heroism of that split-second decision. The weight of responsibility remained. But now, it was tempered by the grim satisfaction of knowing that, against all odds, they had bought the city a chance. The cacophony of sirens, once a relentless assault on the senses, slowly receded into a distant hum. Inside the dispatch center, a profound, almost eerie silence descended. The frantic calls had dwindled. The urgent commands ceased, replaced by the hushed clicks of keyboards and the soft breathing of exhausted individuals. Sarah leaned back in her chair, the adrenaline finally draining from her limbs, leaving behind a profound weariness that seeped into her bones. Her colleagues, equally spent, moved with a quiet resignation, their faces streaked with grime and etched with the indelible marks of the day's ordeal. There was no celebratory cheer, no triumphant shouts, just a shared, unspoken understanding of the horror they had collectively navigated. Each dispatcher sat in their cubicle, staring blankly at screens that no longer flashed with critical alerts, but displayed mundane updates. The weight of knowing there was no replay, no chance to redo a single moment, hung heavy in the air. Every decision, every shouted instruction, every fleeting second of hesitation or conviction was now irrevocably etched into the city's timeline. They had witnessed humanity at its most vulnerable and its most resilient, all through the distorted lens of crackling phone lines and static-filled radio transmissions. The quiet camaraderie among them was palpable, a silent acknowledgement of the shared trauma, the collective burden they would carry long after the last rescue worker had left the scene. They were heroes in their own right, unsung architects of survival, their victories measured not in accolades, but in the absence of greater tragedy. The city outside was still reeling, but it was breathing. It was broken, yes, but not defeated. The early decisions, made in the crucible of absolute uncertainty, had been the fragile fulcrum upon which the fate of thousands had balanced. The dispatcher's instinct, Sarah's unwavering conviction, had not been about finding the right answer in a textbook sense. It had been about finding the only answer left, the single path forward when all others led to certain doom. They hadn't possessed perfect information, they had possessed courage, honed by countless hours of training and tempered by the raw urgency of human suffering. This event, now receding into the annals of emergency response, served as a stark reminder. In those critical moments, when the world teeters on the brink, decisions are not born of complete knowledge, but of an intuitive leap, a calculated risk taken against impossible odds. It was a testament to the invisible decisions made by ordinary people under extraordinary pressure, individuals whose names would never grace headlines, but whose actions reverberated through the lives they saved. As the last rays of dawn painted the scarred skyline in hues of amber and grey, Sarah closed her eyes, the images of the past hours flickering behind her eyelids. She knew that tomorrow the phone would ring again. Another voice, another crisis, another decision. And in that silent, solemn dispatch center, the silent heroes would once again answer the call, forever poised on the precipice of certainty and doubt, ready to make the only choice left. The world continued to turn, oblivious to the silent battles fought in fluorescent-lit rooms, leaving the audience to ponder the countless, unseen moments where fate is decided by a voice on the other end of a line.